Hi everyone, our discussion today is going to be about enabling a pipeline catalog at scale. Next slide. So just housekeeping, something that we have to kind of, put in front of everybody in front of all of these presentations. But our disclaimer is the presentation that is a case study of Fidelity Investments experience. This is not an endorsement or a recommendation of any particular vendor, product, or service. So, Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself there?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Jamie Plower. I lead up the DevOps Integration Experience Squad in Fidelity. The key goal of that squad is to help our partner teams enable pipeline strategy evolution, and also working on our self-service capabilities within the ALM area.
And my name is Aoife Fitzmaurice. I'm a colleague of Jamie's here. I look after the pipeline platforms as a squad lead in that space. And we provide all the kind of platforms that would enable you to basically build and deploy your applications and everything in between it, really. So just a little background in terms of Fidelity itself. Some people may not be familiar with it, but it's probably one of the largest asset managers in the world. It spans back to 1946. It's pretty amazing to kind of think of the amount of change in between that. There's some kind of highlights here around Fidelity's first purchase of a computer, which is crazy to think about at this day and age. But there's a long history of innovation here, both in the fintech space and just in technology in general. And our latest kind of set of innovations is based around cloud itself. So I think over the last couple of years, we've invested a lot in terms of adoption of the cloud. It's going to help us in terms of our competitive advantage, help us to do innovation, help us to pivot at a much more rapid kind of pace. Next slide there. One thing that's very different in Fidelity that may not exist in other companies, and it's kind of good to kind of give a level set and a context around it, is Fidelity isn't really one company. It's maybe a dozen companies under a single umbrella. So in that way, when you can compare it, it's kind of like, the difference between federal and state operations. So we talk about various different business units within Fidelity, and these have their own independent product lines and products, their own independent budgets, concerns, development teams, etc., that you would actually deal with. And then where Jamie and I kind of sit is in centralized IT services. So we offset against all of these business units. We provide them a set of services, a set of platforms in order for them to be able to do their innovation. It can be a difficult experience to deal with so many voices that have very independent thoughts, but definitely kind of leveraging, partnership principles in order to be able to kind of toe that line, in order to be able to to provide the greatest set of services to the most amount of people. Then specifically around what we kind of do within this wheel here on the right-hand side, these are the kind of areas that we really focus in on in terms of the platforms and the capabilities that we do provide. And within that space, our mandate is to provide a next generation software delivery platform for the firm. So provide these services to all of the business units that do exist within Fidelity, and to do it in such a way that it is backed and baked in terms of security, governance, and compliance. We want to focus on our seamless adoption and developer experience. We want to look at stability and resiliency for all of these tools and platforms that are there. But then, as we kind of talked about before, we have challenges within that space with so many voices, with so many kind of people, so many different requirements that are out there. It can be challenging in order to be able to meet that need and not necessarily fall into the trap of looking at a single voice and a single requirement.
Okay, So just to talk a little bit about this further, I want to just discuss a little bit about the pipeline evolution. So thanks, Aoife, for that. As you can see from Aoife's introduction, the landscape is very complex within Fidelity. We're not new to our automation and DevOps journeys. A lot of work has gone over the last few years within these individual business units to improve how we scale and improve our efficiencies around our upload deployment, to whether it be on-prem or in more recent years on our cloud transformation journey. So what I want to outline here is one of the key tenets that we've got to at this stage is whether it be CI/CD, but just breaking it out here in this process across our local development, continuous integration phases. So where we're producing our value candidates, our testing, our provisioning and deployment, and then post-production, our verification. What's been key is identifying, I suppose, our capability map and the common functions that our teams will use. And we've grown a lot of maturity in that area. And one of the key goals that would underpin, obviously, what we're talking about here today is scaling our pipeline catalog strategy is building a sort of shared library of pipeline components and leveraging that talent across the organization, that we can inner source this project and define, as probably a better word, relative paved paths that we can deliver for various workload patterns. So this slide, I suppose, is not highlighting everything, but it does indicate some of the sort of capability domains that we focus on, whether it be the artifact or asset construction, how it's published, the various controls that we want to put into there. As Aoife mentioned, we're highly regulated environment. We've got different workload scopes, so some might be non-critical, some might be require an RTO within half an hour. So we have a whole load of different, I suppose, constraints that we need to leverage, and traditionally these were left to the individual teams to develop in their own isolation. So one of the key goals that we're trying to achieve is not offer that scale, is how do we bring together the best learnings, the feedback from the business units, and providing a centralized Fidelity pipeline library that teams can leverage with confidence to help accelerate their workloads. It's not all bad news. I think what I want to highlight here is that we do have a lot of challenges in the pipeline journey, but like feedback that we've had that teams do enjoy along this journey is by providing the catalog level approach, like a lot of our workload patterns are pretty consistent. So teams do enjoy having the ability, especially smaller teams that may not afford a large DevOps or ops team to help support their needs, that ability to help provide opinionation that they can follow. A lot of the time, policy changes, it evolves, new services come online. So keeping up to date and having simple integrations, for example, common integrations around secrets management, common integrations around our observability and telemetry, best of breed patterns around testing, for example, or workload orchestration. Anything that we can avail there is highly regarded by teams. But at the same time, if teams want to have the flexibility to go themselves, they can do that. And I think that's one of the repeated learnings, that we do provide some somewhat flexible options for the teams, because as Aoife mentioned there, like there's no one way we're going to have a silver bullet for everyone. So it's having that right balance to have teams have the options go forward is a big learning. And that ties into the repeatable patterns and the standards enforcement I mentioned there. Another key learning as well is that as we've gone along our journey, we used to have many platforms within this space, whether it would be across many CSPs. A big effort has gone on in recent time to move behind single platforms with key integration tooling that these teams provide. So the experts provide the best guidance to that, and then the pipeline authors can just integrate with that. It has enabled a lot more speed and acceleration in that space. One of the areas where the challenges still lie is, as being a central team is fine, but we don't speak for everyone. So we do have COE teams that are within the various groups that support or work with their workloads team closely. And at times the feedback has been pipelines can be built upon on top of each other. They can be inconsistent, they can be complex. So teams would nearly spend as much time figuring out the complexities of the automation suites to change and update along with their workload needs. And I think the instability is one of the key factors where they find themselves debugging a lot of the time from this. We obviously work with a lot of independent dependent systems. So it was key that for our automation and pipeline needs that these are stable and built upon. So the idea of having this common library which underpins the catalog approach is that we ensure we build this stability, this reliability on top of the simplicity that will allow the majority of the workloads who have pretty defined goals the ability to run quicker. Access restrictions and everything else, I think it's as the pockets evolve, people have different policies within the various groups. So one of the key areas we wanted to challenge is through self-service, enabling as much simplicity in how they get stood up so they can get up running quickly and focus on the catalogs focusing on their applications and the innovation that they can provide. So with that, it's joining into, I suppose, how we've built that pipeline at scale model, leveraging catalogs and beyond. So one of the first areas that we've taken, as I said, Fidelity is a large company. We have many different business units. Those business units work across many different sort of workloads. So we identified specifically for cloud, in this case, our top 10 workload patterns that we're using. So if you want to take a microservice or a simple service application, the pattern is pretty well known for the majority of teams, and those nuances specifically around how policy or the services that they're integrating with is known up front. So what we have done is identified for these patterns and looking to build out the sort of catalog approach based on these workloads that team can use. So the idea would be that paved path approach is defined using an inner source model. We're taking the best of breed of knowledge and experience from these business units to help sort of agree that sort of 80-20 rule, and then leave the option for the unpaved path route for teams that want to go themselves. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Just want to emphasize standards change, policies change, new requirements come through, and specifically in the financial side that we're based in, regulation and audit is a really critical factor. So it's constant that we are cognizant of the fact of how can we bake in audit-ready regulated items into our rules so that these become a trivial item to do. And that's a key goal of having the standard pipeline as well, that we can take the burden off teams for these extra critical items and ensure that they're as best as possible focused on the security and have these central groups as much as possible inform where these standards and policies change, and then let the teams that consume them elect up to those. And then we also obviously cater for a variety of different platforms across multiple CSPs, which will have specific nuances as well. So finally, it's really to how does this picture come together, and the approach that we're taking, as Aoife mentioned, around achieving this software delivery platform going forward. The platform itself is key, and we do currently support, we want to make sure that self-service and the enablement of this platform is critical. So teams aren't going through ticket-based approaches. They can request agents and build runners to run, configure those to their needs, and what the platform team is ensuring that the correct access and monitoring is in place for those out of the box. The next layer that we offer teams is, I suppose, default build packs. Teams could bring their own sort of runtimes that they wish to use within their CI/CD orchestration. These could be, as I mentioned, our central team can provide platform specific. We could be using open source curated, making sure that they're certified runtimes. We could require vendor specific ones that teams could do. So the flexibility is there that if teams need to run at this base block, they can run. But you can see there's higher effort and low compliance around that, and more effort on their side to continue down that route. The fundamental step above that is the Fidelity and BU shared libraries. One thing that this provides, going back to my original slide around our capability map, is it will cover the cross sets. If you want to think of it like the Lego blocks or the IKEA instructions as to how the workloads will be built, that's what we're achieving here. And using that inner source model, as I say, where the cream rises to the top, we're always getting the best definition for those individual capabilities. And what comes on top of that is that workload definition will then be able to reuse those shared library components, defining the actual path that the pipeline catalog will define. One thing that we mention here is that, like, one of the challenges that we had is sprawl of these pipeline definitions and keeping them consistent. So with this model, the software delivery platform will help version these catalogs through this model, and then teams can just adapt and receive those at ease. So they're just focused on there's no Jenkins files or anything like that, for example, being maintained in the repositories. These are all centralized away. So it keeps that burden away from them. So if they have 50 microservices using a similar catalog, it can just make a change and then adapt if we need to add it, for example, a new security feature or anything like that. So that's a huge change for us. And I think it's one of the more exciting features that we can adapt. And then to build upon the pipeline catalog, as I mentioned, we're in a financial and highly regulated space. So one thing for us is how do we ensure, especially going to cloud, that teams are meeting the required standards and policies. So at this stage, it becomes a little bit more opinionated as we go up here, and teams can opt in at any level that they wish. So for example, we'll provide some certified pipelines, but if there is a step, for example, in our upstream that they require, they can provide that in their own shared library, for example. But the certified phase will allow us to ensure that these are audit approved, ready to go, follow the correct change management procedures and governance gates. And all that is collected, as I say, through the instrumentation of the individual capabilities themselves that will help us gather some of this audit evidence automatically. And then building upon that further, if teams want to take literally code and run end-to-end through to our production environments, we'll provide a full service for that as well. So again, building on this catalog idea, tying into sort of the deployment strategies and the audit on top of that, we'll build in the certified and regulated workflows. And then finally, a flavor of that is just that final regulation. We might have specific workloads that do require SOC, for example, or HIPAA-based regulation built into it. And we'll create opinionation around that to ensure that the right checks and balances are in place to meet those audit requirements. And with the goal that we need to provide evidence to those approved auditors at any time, we have that ready to go. So in a nutshell, stepping back, it's a combination of a rich shared library, a rich collaborative environment, and then working with our workload definitions to define catalogs to allow us to offer that to the majority of Fidelity to take on board and run with. But at the same time, offer key flexibility for those specific edge use cases that they have, that they can still layer that on top of this to cover their edge cases. So they're never blocked, or they're never sort of working through some track as well. So it's the best of both worlds. And if there is a case where that needs to come into the global library, that's where we can offer that through the inner source track.
I think it would be fair as well to say, Jamie, is that like we provide these capabilities out of the box. So as soon as a consumer kind of onboards to our platform, right, it's just offered out of the box. And it's a choice then from their perspective of whether they want to go the simple route and just adopt the regulated workflows, or whether they want to actually do more experimentations themselves, and then they have that kind of flexibility like you mentioned, you know.
100%, yeah. And I think a key point as well is underpinning all of this is the experience. So like not everything is static in nature, right? So we have to think about day two activities, libraries come and go, repos. So there's a whole experience that's built into this behind that allows the developer to self-serve, I suppose, how they do that, manage the versioning of some of these elements as well, so that they're not just automatically getting stuff that hits them. And so they have a very controlled way, or they can opt into a more later model based on the configurations that are provided. So the template catalog is very exciting. It provides areas that we can allow that standardization, and I know we're working with our vendors as well just to sort of enhance this model as we go forward. I think around policy enhancements and things like that we can go through that would even further offer that flexibility and additional governance and regulatory audit requirements that we need, that we may have to, I suppose, right at the library level, that we could inherit more natively within the tooling that we leverage. So but yeah, I think like we have to be realistic. It's a large firm with a lot of different maturity levels. So teams that are mature that want to go, they have the option in this model. Teams that, and I think it was one of the big bits of feedback that we got going, especially toward cloud, it can be quite a, not only focusing on the app, but the policy and all the other baggage that comes with it. Like how do they work with this? So this is a model that will simplify that route of getting the workloads out in a safe and secure manner, at the same time meeting all our needs. So
allows them to just focus on their kind of feature development and just kind of like getting that innovation out fast versus the mechanics of how to do these things. It's just there, you know.
And I think as well, it changes the culture. Like for example, especially that inner source approach, right? Like up till now, teams were a lot more command and control because they felt they couldn't trust.
Yeah.
I think when you have a lot more of the intelligent voices and influences coming from around the firm who've done this, or just having that collective voice really brings a richness to something that we've had before, and I think actually gives more confidence to those using it. And as you can see, as you go up the food chain here, there's more support afforded to that model versus teams that want to run themselves. So it's been probably our biggest challenge. How do we address that? And I think this is the approach that we're very excited about. And I think hopefully some of these innovations will grow to something that we can offer outside eventually. But it's it's currently where we stand. And as I said, it's something that we need to continue working on to improve.
Absolutely.
So with that, I think we'll go into some questions or
open it up.
Hey folks, thanks for joining me here at CityCon today. I hope you're enjoying the event. The purpose of this talk today is to talk a little bit.
So happy to kind of take any kind of Q&A at this point, or, you know, we can talk further on any topic really at all. There's a question there from Zach. Jamie, in such an environment, I understand it takes time to onboard teams. How long have you had teams using it, and how far would you say adoption is onto CD pipelines? So I think it's probably fair to say, like, you know, we've gone through various iterations in our firm, right? You know, years, some not so successful. And Jamie kind of talked through that, but I think we kind of consolidated on the things that we don't hasn't worked, right? You know, we are very much bought into the everything is code kind of capabilities and stuff that's there, but in some of our previous iterations, it was very much up to the various teams themselves. Template technologies wasn't advanced enough, you know, being able to do reusability wasn't advanced enough, and it was very challenging for kind of the firm to be able to adopt kind of pipeline as code and things like that. So I think baked in with our services layer, our onboarding services, and kind of going much beyond, you know, being very opinionated within the platforms themselves, so that it's not just onboarding my project in my area, it's configuring the project, adding in all the access, baking in the libraries and the catalogs and things like that on top of that. It just makes, you know, users from the very beginning much easier for them to get onboarded. So I think, you know, as time, you know, goes on, people have to move away from their customized setups into this standardized kind of setups. It is taking time, but I think the adoption is there, and the desire to kind of move towards it is huge. I don't know, Jamie, what do you think?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, and it really, to me, comes down to two factors: tooling and our maturity in this journey as well. As you mentioned, we had a proliferation of tooling originally. There's been some efforts to standardize that, focus on best of breed, where the biggest value is coming from the firm. And that's, again, simplified the complexity to onboarding to one point. And then the cloud journey isn't something new, but obviously at the start, we did probably take a sprawl approach. There was multiple platforms in use. As I mentioned in the talk, there's definitely standards around technology that we're buying into in Fidelity, and then obviously the maturity around those, whether it be orchestration patterns or the workload definitions that we're doing, that teams are definitely standardizing it, because the critical value of Fidelity is being able to deliver value, right? So I think our maturity has probably come full circle with CI. There's definitely a lot of consensus around that approach. CDs obviously a bit to go, but definitely I think regardless of the target endpoint that we have a lot more standardization around that, which we're seeing a lot more adoption on. So it's all a journey, but we're definitely moving a lot more based on the model that we just shown, and obviously some of the standardization around the tooling and our maturity.
So there's a question here in the Q&A: how do you guide people to use template pipelines and not simply choose their own adventure when they want to experiment with technology? Do you want to go first, Jamie?
Sure. So I think the initiate buy-in, I think first of all, like we mentioned there beforehand, it's probably the CI was very easy phase to get people bought in. I think a lot of teams very much focused on a container pattern or otherwise, that they really wanted to, I suppose, understand what other teams were using, and that was a great approach. So the standardization there is sort of easy win. Down the line, I think it's really just working again on more beyond that. I think how we can enable teams a little bit easier. Yeah.
I think as well is we're kind of in a sweet spot ourselves. Like, we're central IT, and the firm is kind of basically a loop around us. So we're very plugged into all the different business units itself. So the development teams plus out to their consumers that are kind of, you know, consuming their products themselves. So, you know, we can pull these people together, work then as a firm to kind of get to standardization, and we can kind of ship that across various different business units. So then it becomes a homegrown kind of thing in order to adopt that kind of standardized solutions versus everybody trying to kind of combat the same problems. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah, exactly. It's huge.
Culture is critical here. I think experimentation is absolutely something that we would look to seek out, but it all sort of comes to a funnel point at the end of the day when teams are trying to achieve the same outcomes, that we get that adoption and standardization.
So what was the process you used to initiate buy-in and adoption of these centralized offerings? So I think we've kind of answered a bit of that, but it's part of it is our setup and our culture. But
collaboration, I think, like, sorry to cut across there, if you like, but I think like the working groups and like communication's been critical. I think like there's no sort of team coming out with these huge opinionations. This discussion happens at the heart, understanding the problems we're trying to solve, making sure that they're involved in the output. And I think the the data points that we can collect as well is critical as well, so that there's actually a cart for adoption, right? So that they're getting additional insights that they would otherwise have to craft themselves. So I think the sooner that we broke that barrier and realized that a lot of the repeatable patterns, we noticed that that's where the biggest value was.
And I think then probably one final one, is it relevant to expose pipelines for developers, thought leaders like Netflix, pipelines from developers exposing only requirements for applications, Netflix double delivery with that? And I think that's aligns with what we're trying to do with catalogs, to be frank. You know, basically just provide a set of kind of template pipelines to the business partners based around patterns, and basically developers should just be able to plug in parameters and it's,
Yep.
you know, deploy away right from CI to CD. So what do you think, Jimmy?
Couldn't agree more. I think that's definitely the direction that we're going, and as we have these frank discussions, we can align, I suppose, our overall architectures and the way we build applications to enable that, right? But to your point, I think with the workload definitions we have right now, that's absolutely the approach that we've been taking to remove pipeline authoring as much as possible and align it to literally plug and play and let them go off.
I'm wondering how many engineers you have working on the CD pipeline. Such a large initiative must have taken quite an effort. What do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, like you're right. Like there is a small central team. I think, as I mentioned, that this isn't a sort of one conquers all. It's definitely a collaborative effort. I think that the critical point here is inner source, in that we're gaining the scale. By following that capability model, we can really focus where the and then bring people to the problem. So people are able to scale from that perspective. And then, as we mentioned there, we have a clear model around our shared responsibility, so teams can opt in and I suppose get the richness from the majority. So it's definitely how we've been approaching it.
I think it's kind of, you know, it's a bit of a divide and conquer, right? Like when we explained our kind of organizational setup, we have these various different business units, but then you take the sub teams from within that are doing that innovation, and you extend your own team with that. So it may feel like you have kind of a large team, but you don't have a massive team. Like, you know, there's less than 50 collectively kind of working on this effort at any given point in time, but they're able to kind of do that standardization across the BUs, and then we're able to do standardization for Fidelity itself and bring it up that layer. So from that kind of, you know, grassroots kind of setup, we're able to do a lot with a small team, I would say, in comparison to other companies.
And I think the COEs, just to finally, the individual business units that are adopting are key to this as well, right? So they're the ones providing feedback, that point of view, and ensuring that we're dealing with that problem where beforehand they were building upon, whereas now they're just part of the discussion from the get-go. So we're trying to address as much as early in the process as possible, and through feedback minimize any maintenance requirements down the line and backward compatibility issues that may have risen in the past.
Yeah. Perfect. Not sure if there's any other questions or anything like that anybody might have in this space. No.
No. Well, thank you for everyone for attending, and appreciate your.
Hope you're enjoying the day and the various sessions. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.